Hello, everyone. This is Caroline Smith, and today I will begin reading Indians of the Oaks by Melicent Lee. Today I'll be reading the introduction, and I apologize if I mispronounce anything. I probably will. Okay. Indians of the Oaks, Introduction. Welcome to the world of the Kumiyai, the Indians of the Oaks. It is a world that exists no more. The green valleys resplendent with oak groves and the mountain-to-desert paths described herein exist for those who search them out. But those patterns of life, the daily activities that linked one generation to the other in the stories of Quitok, Payan, and others, are gone. The world of the Indians of the Oaks is the land of the people the Spanish called Diegueños, the native inhabitants of the coastal plains, mountains, and desert regions of what is now Southern California. It was a land that extended from the Pacific Ocean to the Salton Sink and from the San Dieguito River south to Ensenada in what is now Baja California. This world was divided in two. The people to the north spoke a different dialect of Diegueño than the people of the south, and are referred to today as Ipai, the word in their language meaning people. Those to the south can be referred to as Tipai, the word in their dialect with the same meaning, but today they are generally known by their own name, Kumiyai. With the coming of the Spanish, these people received a name that gave no consideration to their division, one that characterized a former religion rather than gave meaning to the native population. The name Diegueño, after Mission San Diego established in their territory, came into common use when speaking of both groups. There is evidence that in ancient times the name Kumiyai was used in the northern dialect area as well, and today Kumiyai is commonly used to refer to all people formerly known as Diegueños. The Kumiyai lived in groups or bands of about 15 to 30 people, with larger aggregates occurring when seasonal foods were plentiful or in favored locales such as coastal bays and lagoons. Each band belonged to a larger clan or lineage, which hunted game and gathered wild foods in a territory that it recognized as its own. For nearly 2 millennia, these people lived in relative peace in their own hills and valleys. They developed the use of acorns as a food, grinding them to a meal with stone tools, and learning to leach away the bitter tannic acid. They utilized agave, mesquite, beans, cactus fruits, and unnumbered other fruits, seeds, and roots. For the most part, they merely gathered wild plants, but there is increasing evidence that they also transplanted plants or seeds to better locations either for growing or for ease of harvesting. Plant resources were managed by fire, and seed was broadcast to produce food crops were desired. The practice of agriculture seems limited to these people who inhabited the territory along the New and Alamo rivers in the Imperial Valley. These people had learned to grow corn, beans, and squash in cultivated plots watered by floodwaters of the rivers. Usually, the women did the gathering of wild plants, with the men assisting them in the more difficult harvesting. The men hunted large game animals such as deer or bighorn sheep, as well as rabbits, or trapped small rodents, birds, and reptiles as a supplement to their diet. In order to take advantage of ripening crops or a concentration of animals, the people moved with the seasons between 1 or 2 permanent villages and numerous campsites. They did not live in isolation. Contact with other groups for trade or marriages was important. Baskets, pottery, shell for jewelry, stone for tools, and foodstuffs changed hands during these meetings at some favored spot. Dances, games, and other socializing took place as they had for countless generations until the day the Spanish arrived. Beginning in 1769, with the establishment of the Mission of San Diego de Alaca by Father Serra, the traditional way of life started to change. At first, the coastal Kumiyai, with whom the Spanish had made initial contact, acted peaceably. But as more and more unreasonable demands were made of them and the old ways were threatened, Kumiyai resentment of the intruders increased. The Spanish were interested in Indians only to convert them to Catholicism and to use Kumiyai labor to help build the mission system. The Kumiyai were used to freedom, but the Spanish expected them to remain under their control at the missions. The Indians had never worried about time, but the Spanish had regulated their activities with bells. Within the decade, some of the Kumeyaay rebelled and attacked the mission, but the attack was poorly organized, for they had little experience in such matters. The revolt failed to remove the Spanish. Rather than submit to the difficult new way of life, many of the Kumeyaay moved away from the coastal areas into the mountains. In 1821, Mexico overthrew the Spanish government and seized all of the mission lands and power they had represented. The Kumiyai, who had been missionized, fled into town and were promptly debased or enslaved. The Indians who were living in the more remote areas found themselves being ousted from more and more of their territory as the outsiders moved onto their land and drove them even farther into marginal lands. By the time the Americans took over California in 1848, the traditional Indian culture had been irreparably disrupted. Many of the American immigrants became ranchers and used huge tracts of lands, often employing the Indians as ranch hands. This activity introduced rudimentary wage economy to the Kumiyai. Then, when gold was discovered in the mountains in 1870, American miners and settlers poured into the region, dealing the final blow to the way of life of the Kumiyai had known for 2 millennia. Historically, it is not known how many Kumiyai lived in the area at the time of the Spanish arrival, but modern estimates place the number close to 20,000. Today, there are approximately 3,000. Many of these live on reservations, of which there are 14 in San Diego County, and in Indian communities in Baja California. Others prefer to live in cities, filling a wide variety of jobs and some owning their own businesses. Many maintain close ties with reservations, while some do not. Within the last few years, there's been a strong resurgence of interest and pride in the old ways. It was for the Kumiyai of today as much as it was for non-Kumiyai reader that Melicent Humason Lee intended Indians of the Oaks. Melicent Humason was an Easterner born in New London, Connecticut in 1890. She was married there to artist Leslie W. Lee. Shortly after, the Lees moved to San Diego, where they maintained a residence in town and another at a remote ranch in Dehesa, 35 miles away from the city. It was the Dehesa property, which the Lees named Hollow of the Hills Ranch, that first brought Melicent Lee into contact with the Kumiyai. The ranch was situated in an area which had once been intensively occupied by these people, and the remnants of the population remained there, clinging to the vestiges of their culture while trying to cope with the new. Intrigued by these people, and perhaps sensing the impending loss of their culture, Melicent Lee began to spend more and more time with them. Her friends in San Diego commented on her progressively fewer visits to the city, remarking that she showed a preference for the quiet life of retirement. It was hardly that. A great part of her time was spent with the Indians, traveling with them and participating in their work as they moved from one seasonal site to another, trying to hold on to the surviving traces of their traditional ways. Sometimes Leslie Lee accompanied his wife in this activity, making an occasional painting, but usually she went alone with her Kumiyai friends. As a sign of their acceptance and esteem, they bestowed upon her a native name. Melicent Lee took great interest in drawing out the ways of the past from these individuals who remembered them. On one occasion, at her request, 2 Indian friends constructed a house in the traditional Kumiyai style. She faithfully recorded the materials and methods of construction used in building the house and later reported on them in an article entitled The Ancient House of the San Diegueño Indian, which appeared in Art and Archaeology in 1928. On another occasion, during the same year, the school children of San Diego were invited by the San Diego Museum, now the Museum of Man, to come to Balboa Park for a demonstration and taste of Kumiyai cooking. The event was arranged by Melicent Lee and 2 of her Kumiyai friends, who prepared acorn meal and rabbit to show the young people how this was done. For the 160th anniversary of San Diego's founding, she created a Kumiyai rancheria at the historic San Diego Presidio site. Authentic houses were built and furnished with tools borrowed from the Indians, the San Diego Museum, and various private collectors. Kumiyai participants were dressed in authentic old-style dress and engaged in traditional pursuits: seed grinding, rabbit skin blanket weaving, basketry, and pottery making. Mrs. Lee hoped that this program would provide the public with a more accurate picture of what the Kumiyai culture had once been like. However, her interest in Kumiyai was not limited to the ways that were gone. She was also concerned with helping her Indian friends achieve the artistic recognition she felt was due to them. For this purpose, she presented a lecture at the San Diego Museum entitled "The Indian Speaks for Himself," in which she discussed Indian aesthetics in painting, basket weaving, pottery making, and dancing. She then organized and directed the San Diego Indian Arts League to introduce Indian artists and craftspeople into the community and educate the public about Indian art. The culminating effort of her activities was Indians of the Oaks. In essence, two stories of Indian life in the long ago of San Diego County, interwoven with the doings of Queetalk, the Herb Woman, and Baby Was, Apachuk, and others, are the Kumiyai tales, games, songs, and recipes and vocabulary gathered by Melicent Lee over the years. Not only is this book a fine adventure story, it is an extremely valuable source of ethnographic materials for Native Americans, students of Indian culture, anthropologists, and historians as well. The descriptive accounts of Kumiyai, agave gathering, rattlesnake hunting, cradle board manufacture, bow and arrow construction, and use, herb gathering, and other activities that appear in Indians of the Oaks are to be found in almost no other publication. Thanks to the dedication of Melicent Lee, vital information about an important and valued culture that might otherwise have been lost was saved. So, welcome to a world of long ago. The characters are fictional, drawn from the mind of the author, but the patterns of the characters' lives are real and accounting of authentic lifeways recorded for us all by Melicent Lee. That was written by Ruth Gatterow, former education coordinator at the San Diego Museum of Man.